I'm very excited today to introduce Yulema Cruz here with Motivity. And we are going to do this podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about supervision and documentation.
Yes.
And I will say that this is my first podcast, so I'm hoping that I'm going to do this correctly. And I know that our wonderful community manager, Mark, is going to edit out anything that's not done well. But my name is Christy Evanko, and I'm the Director of Operations and Human Resources for Motivity. And I'm so excited to have Yulema here. Yulema, why don't you tell you a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a board certified behavior analyst, doctoral, with about 23 years of experience in the field. I've specialized in skill acquisition and behavior reduction programming, as well as the supervision of behavior technicians, trainees, and newly certified BCBAs. I received my PhD in education with a concentration in ABA from Nova Southeastern University. I am also the co-founder of Chi ABA Consulting Group, which is a private organization that specializes in providing competency-based ABA supervision for organizations, schools, and individuals, as well as parent coaching, school consultations, the development of supervision systems, and the dissemination of ABA to other countries and languages. I've also co-authored the ABA Supervision Handbook, a guide to quality fieldwork experience, as well as the Consulting Supervisor Handbook, helping newly certified BCBAs navigate supervision. I am also a consultant for the International Ethics Hotline.com, where I provide ethical advice in the area of supervision. I presented at over 40 conferences, venues, and I was the past president for the Florida Association for Behavior Analysis, an organization that is very dear to my heart. So that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
That's a lot. That's great. And we kind of intersect in the fact that I sort of work in ethics as well. I teach ethics at Mary Baldwin University. And but what we are kind of talking about today is ethics and supervision, which is your specialty. And I think I just sent somebody to you. I send people to certainly the ethics hotline all the time. But you are amazing in that you're answering those supervision ethics questions. And it's so helpful for just especially newer BCBAs, but even BCBAs that have been practicing. I've been practicing since 2012, like a long time, still need that guidance and help. But today I think we're going to dig down a little bit deeper into documentation and supervision. And I do want to sort of delineate supervision a little bit, because supervision of people can mean a lot of things. You can supervise RBTs, you can supervise BCABAs, you can supervise other BCBAs. But also, but what we're talking about today is really the supervision of trainees. And yes, the BACB defines a trainee as somebody who is on their path to certification as a BCBA or a BCABA.
Right.
So we're going to use that term. We're going to try and I'll try and be good instead of saying supervisee, because a supervisee could be like anybody. Yes. We're going to use that word trainee. And specifically, we're going to talk about documentation. So can you just talk a little bit about why documentation is so important in that trainee supervision?
Of course. First, I wanted to say thank you for your kind words about the hotline. We have an amazing team led by Dr. John Bailey. We also have amazing ethicists like Mary Jane Weiss and Dr. Tom Zane. And I am forgetting various names, and I apologize for that. Kristen Russell also. So again, we have an amazing team. So it isn't just me. I just wanted to put that out there. But thank you for your kind words.
Thanks for saying that. And I've seen your presentations. I love when you all get up and you present it all by and take questions, and it's great. But yes, good clarification.
we love doing that. Okay, so why is documentation important? So as behavior analysts, we are used to obtaining repeated measures and engaging in continuous measurement and continuous treatment monitoring.
Mhm.
Supervision also requires continuous monitoring and measurement.
Yep.
This is accomplished through documentation, which helps to ensure accountability and clarity regarding the trainee's progress, the trainee's goals, and feedback that the trainee received from the BCBA supervisor and implemented. It also helps to track the trainee's development over time and identify areas in need of improvement, and also provide a record of the decisions that were made during each of the supervision sessions. Ultimately, this is also our ethical responsibility as per code element 4.05. Of course, I was going to bring that up, which is maintaining supervision.
My code actually. Line in a notebook. Go for it.
Yeah.
4.05 documentation. That's right.
Maintaining supervision documentation. And as we know, supervision requirements aren't met without that documentation. I keep saying that documentation is part of the whole supervision package. I've actually gotten ethics hotline questions pertaining to whether supervision occurred if documentation was not obtained and if it wasn't recorded. And the answer is unfortunately not. I mean, we know that
tree does not fall in the forest unless you've heard it, basically, is what you're saying.
exactly,
Yeah.
that is exactly what I'm saying. And so unfortunately, if the documentation didn't occur, if nothing was recorded, even if physically the supervision took place, if there's no record of it, we can't say that it happened.
You know, that's funny. And I'm going to go off topic a tiny bit here because I'm also a Motivity's ACE coordinator. And that's the same kind of approach that we take with CEUs as well. I think a lot of times people are like, I was there. My friend sitting next to me saw me there. And I'm like, yeah, but if I don't have that documentation, because if I'm audited, if I don't have that piece of paper saying you signed in or however we are taking whatever, we have to have that policy and you have to follow that policy, then how in the world are the BACB supposed to know all of that happened? They have to have some way. And the way they do is through documentation. That's the way they figure it out. So I hear you, but yeah, it doesn't happen unless it's documented. So that would definitely make documentation important, which kind of actually leads us to the next thing we want to talk about, which are the items that are needed for documentation. And so really in the beginning, you kind of start out with a supervision contract.
Yep. You start with the supervision contract, which is the foundation of the supervisory relationship. And really, the whole intent of the supervision contract is to protect both parties' interests, both the supervisor and the trainee. So the supervision contract really outlines the nature of the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each party's roles and responsibilities, each party's expectations, and this is very important, goals for the trainee, right? These goals should be in the supervision contract. Not only, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in January when I talk about individualized supervision plans that need to include those goals in a more specific manner, but overall goals for the trainee as a result of the supervisory relationship should be outlined in the contract. The contract also includes contractual terms, including, those that are pertaining to proprietary information. When data collection sheets are developed from scratch, when systems are developed from scratch, all of that is proprietary information, and we want to make sure all that is recorded in the contract. Ultimately, the contract does aim to ensure that mutual understanding regarding supervision requirements from the BACB and the organization, including billing practices and reporting practices and so forth, how confidentiality will be observed, not just for the client, but also for your trainee. right? Nobody who's not privy to the trainees' confidential information that affects their progress as trainees should be privy to that information.
Right.
So also, the contract should include how supervision hours will be accrued and documented. Very important again. Any supervision fees, if applicable, consequences for not adhering to the terms of the contract. That's important, and it's a question that I get through the hotline quite often. And any termination conditions, which is another inquiry that I get through the hotline a lot. Am I able to terminate the relationship with this trainee if I feel that they haven't made the progress that's expected of them? And if this wasn't delineated in the contract to begin with, if there isn't language in the contract to the effect of relationship will be terminated after feedback has been provided these many times, or the final fieldwork verification form will not be signed if any ethical violations were
I hear that a lot.
discovered.
I was just going to say that's 412, which is appropriately terminating supervision. Or I guess it would also be terminated when somebody's finished. That would be in
Absolutely.
there as well. Just like we would put those same types of things in a contract that we would have with our clients. This is what happens. You transition when you've met all your goals. Well, I guess one of the main goals for a trainee would be to finish their hours.
Yes. And those termination conditions are important. You can't
Yeah.
put everything on there that could possibly happen. We can't cover everything. But, but I think we, as experience teaches us, we may have a good idea of the things that would be appropriate to include in that termination criteria. But yeah, very important foundational document. Yep.
And, this is just I always, as a teacher, I like to use things as teaching moments. I feel like these early things, this supervision contract is kind of your beginning to contracts. As a BCBA, you would have to have contracts with insurance companies or contracts with an organization with which you'd work. And you want to train yourself to be able to read them and read them with a critical eye, to be looking at the things that are important. So if, let's say, Joe supervisor has a contract and they send it to you as the trainee, you want to read through it and make sure it makes sense. And if there's any red flags or anything you don't understand, to bring that up ahead of time and not later when it kind of bites you, I guess. But luckily there are templates out there, aren't there? I feel like they're APBA or BACB or somebody puts out templates.
Yes, the BACB has a template out there. I'm not sure about APBA. I'd have to research that. But also, I think it's important to note, number one, providing our trainees the opportunity to read those contracts before they sign it. I also have heard that trainees are highly encouraged to hurry up and sign contracts.
Oh, yeah, but they do. But
Sometimes.
you need to sign it with a discerning eye. This is something you're signing. You're like, yeah, oh. So you hear that happens a lot. People just kind of sign it and don't read it. And I know, we're so inundated with contracts. If I sign up for Apple Play or whatever, those things, I'm not reading all of those. But this is something that you really want to make sure, okay, I'm comfortable with these termination. I'm comfortable with the way you're getting paid or however that's working. And,
yes. Yeah. And also contracts can be amended, right?
Good point.
Either trainees or supervisors can issue an addendum to a contract, and as long as both parties sit down and agree upon the new terms and give each other plenty of time to review the new terms of the addendum in the contract, that can be done in a very appropriate, and ethical way. It's important, I think, to note that the initial contract likely is not the end all and be all, right? They can be amended.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point and good. And things like, especially maybe something happens, you're a supervisor and maybe something happens with a trainee that you're working with over here and you're like, ooh, I really need to cover that. You might want to add it as an addendum in the contract. I can see that. But as long as, of course, those things are discussed ahead of time, both parties agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have our contract. Let's say we have our contract. Things are going great. We are going to have sessions where the supervisor would work with the trainee. And that's another bit of documentation. And I wanted to share, just because this is Motivity, we worked together kind of on a documentation system for Motivity. So I do want to try and share that. Let me see. I hope I can. Uh-huh. So this is Motivity. And I hope you see this okay. Yeah, there we go. So this is the system, and this is what we call a trainee supervision session. And if you are a Motivity user, you probably don't have this in your note templates. You could ask for it from your CSC. But the way we designed this was twofold, actually. One is it starts with a program. So if you go into the libraries and into the Motivity Community Library, and you go down to numbers 2, so you can see the little number 1. 2 is sort of for staff. And that way it just kind of separates it out. But you can see this trainee supervision program. And the way we worked out this trainee supervision program is to be worked in 2 different ways, because you will have different experiences. You can have an experience where you are doing indirect supervision, or unrestricted, I guess is the better way of calling that.
Yeah, unrestricted hours or activities.
Unrestricted hours, or you're observing your trainee with a client, with somebody. But these are different things that we talked about you can measure, although in Motivity, of course, you can change anything you want. But let's say, hey, I arrived on time, I brought my agenda, we can plus that, I developed my own goals, that's great. Oh, I didn't bring any questions for my supervisor, I did my self-assessment, things like that. But also if we do observation behaviors is kind of set up separately. Let me go into that. Then, here we go. Sorry, it starts here, like exhibits professional demeanor. And you and I talked a little bit about that in terms of you need to define that. And actually, that might be something that you talk about in an early session. This is what I expect from you is in terms of demeanor. How do you exhibit yourself with the client? So maybe we can take some data on that. And so this would be a program where you might take data during a session. And then once that happens, this program leads, and it won't this time because I was just running the simulation, but it leads directly into this template here, which is the trainee supervision session. And it would come in here, you would fill out kind of some of this information would be pre-populated. But if you were doing, let's say, supervised field work in an individual and it was restricted, and you observed the client, then those targets would be there. If you weren't observed with a client, then those targets wouldn't be there. But then the other targets, like did you arrive on time, they would show up. So that is a very, very quick and dirty kind of way we felt like you could do some data collection and through Motivity or any other data collection system that you have. But it's great to have, just like you said, if there's no documentation of the session, it didn't happen. So this is a way to have happen. Now the BACB, and we'll talk about this in a second. I want to continue on this vein, but the BACB does have these monthly fieldwork verification forms, and this is not something that would replace a monthly fieldwork verification form. It's something that would lead into it.
Right.
But I just want to ask you and make sure, if you want to say anything here about the kinds of things that you want to have in this reporting when you're having sessions with the supervisor. And we had places in there too where you could add notes or talk about kind of things that you talked about or different goals. And of course, in Motivity, it's all customizable anyway. But what are the kinds of things that you like to see or you think are important to see in those actual session notes where you had a supervision session, either a group or an individual?
Sure. I would like to see the date and duration of the supervision meeting session, right? That feedback session. Also, date and duration of any trainee observation, because those are
Mm.
important to keep track of, right? It's
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
observations per month that are
Or
required by the
even maybe the
BACB.
direct work they were doing that wasn't observed too, but having that logged, those hours that are logged. And that was one of the things
Right.
we included. Yes. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Also, any task list items that were addressed so that the
Mhm.
both supervisor and supervisee have that record. Um,
Yes. I remember you bringing that up. That was really important. And actually I copied that from the BACB handbook into the program because the easiest thing, of course, is to go through and do that checklist. And it's already provided you, the topics or the things that a supervisor will count as supervision or up to the supervisor, but there are
right,
definite guidelines. So that's really
right.
great that I was so glad when you brought that up. It's like, hey, just bring that list on over.
Yeah. And speaking about that, also any topics that were discussed, whether they had to do with a task list or not, there
Mhm.
might be topics that are more pertinent to, for example, professional skills that might warrant a conversation and development of goals, or perhaps a performance improvement plan. We don't want these things to happen, but they do occur. And we want to make sure that we record that on our supervision note or log. Also, any trainee goals that were reviewed for, and I think you talked about this already, whether they were already mastered or goals that the trainee needs to work on um,
Right.
a second time, or perhaps new goals. An evaluation of the trainee's professional skills is important. And that is in the form that you just showed. Did the trainee
Mhm.
show up on time? Did they engage in active listening? Did they, for example, take notes? Did they um, accept feedback appropriately? Things
Right.
like
That was
that.
one of them. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
We had a good long discussion about that I thought you had some such great observations and some things to include. So
well, thank you. But also, any feedback that was provided by the BCBA supervisor, whether it was corrective and positive feedback, we want to celebrate those milestones for our trainees. And we also want to make sure that they have corrective feedback in writing, not just verbal, right? Different means, um, I think, helps for shaping behavior. Also, any action items or goals that the trainee might need to work on long term, right? We can um, record short term things that were addressed, but any long term goals that those short term activities will help to accomplish. And then, of course, any signatures or approvals for billing purposes that might need to be recorded as well.
right, that's good. And we're going to talk a little bit more about billing later in this because that's a kind of a whole different animal when there's billing involved. Yes.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really comprehensive, and I'm sure people can think of more or use your book or some of the supervision books too out there to help them with that. And then again, like I said, Motivity, we were like, hey, this is interesting. We need to create this, and you can use your staff as learners in Motivity for actually no extra charge at this time. And so if you are interested in that and you're watching this podcast, please reach out to your customer success consultant because they can kind of set you up with that program if you have a hard time finding it. But from that, it sort of lead into that monthly fieldwork verification form. So that's the next level of documentation that has to happen. And I really like that it's monthly because you were, when you were saying that documentation is important to say that it happened. Well, if you waited till it was annual or you waited to the end of the year, then kind of finding that documentation might be harder. So at monthly, at least it prompts you to make sure you have all your ducks in a row every month and not just at the end.
Absolutely. And that monthly note is very important. It is so for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps you track your experience on a monthly basis, as you were mentioning. These monthly ones are not the ones that trainees need to send to the BACB. Those are for them and their supervisor. Each one of them must have a copy to keep
So
for 7 years.
okay, but so you don't turn them in unless you're audited, but they're still required, right? They're not optional. Yeah.
Absolutely. They are not optional. They are required, but they are not sent to the BACB with their application. They are
Right.
kept in the trainees and BCBA supervisors possession for 7 years for auditing purposes. That's the very first and important, the most important reason. The second reason why that is important is because trainees, if they have a dispute with their BCBA supervisor, where the supervisor is refusing to sign off on that final form for any reason, and the trainee has all their monthly forms accurately signed and completed, they can submit a form on the BACB website that is called the contested fieldwork form, where they can ask the BACB for assistance in resolving this dispute between the supervisor and the trainee. So if the trainees don't have the monthly forms, they cannot fill out that contested fieldwork form on the BACB website to resolve that dispute. So that's another very good reason why those monthly forms are important.
And they need to be, and like you said, it's very important for the trainee to retain their copy, but it's just as important for the supervisor to retain their copy, especially if for some reason the copies didn't match, or that would be another thing. Like I said, I was certified in 2012. You were certified before me. We didn't have all of this kind of stuff back when we did that. It was a little more. And as a matter of fact, even since I haven't supervised a trainee in a while, but I do like how there's just more and more documentation, property or things that you need to do that the BACB are coming up with just based on like, oh, this happened, so now this is how we're going to address it. But it just seemed to be a lot more buttoned up. And we used to have to go through a module of the BACB. We of course have to do your 8-hour supervision, and you have to maintain your supervision CEUs. But there used to be a module where they would kind of go through the paperwork, which unfortunately they don't have now.
I miss
But
that.
I'm sad too, but because it was great. I remember, and I'd be happy. It really walked you through it, and as things changes. But they're in their newsletters, they do have the changes. Hopefully supervisors are keeping up on that, because it really is beholden on the supervisor and the trainee to kind of keep up with any of those changes.
Yes, absolutely. Especially when it comes to converting those hours from concentrated to regular field work, and how many of these hours is worth this much time and so forth. I think that's something that supervisors should go through with supervisees at the beginning of the supervisory relationship, to make sure that supervisees know accurate ways of keeping track of their hours in each type of experience.
If a trainee has a question, of course they could ask their supervisor. If the supervisor is not sure about this, what would be would it be a good idea to write the ethics hotline? Would it? I don't think the BACB can answer those questions all the time, although maybe contacting the BACB. What do you suggest?
I suggest the BCBA handbook.
Yeah.
I say this to all of my students and my supervisees trainees. The BCBA handbook is really your best friend.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
it's
If you were
very
having a
comprehensive.
question and the handbook, and you weren't like there was a unique situation or something, what do you think?
Um, if it's ethically related, then absolutely write to the hotline. Otherwise, I would say write to the board, and
Right.
they should, in that contact us form, they should be able to answer any questions. But again, the BCBA handbook it's really their best friend when it comes to those specific, not quite nuanced information, but they're very clear about requirements and parameters, and
Right.
it's a matter of sitting down with the supervisor, and the supervisor perhaps consulting with a senior person. That
Mm-hmm.
could be another option.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Probably not
senior.
Facebook.
Yeah. or Reddit.
Or Reddit or any of that. Right. Discord. No, no, no. But
No.
and that's a good point. Your senior.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a senior colleague, a senior supervisor who may
Yeah.
have already gone through this and know the answers to these questions.
Mhm. So the monthly field work form, we talked about that, and then that kind of leads into the final field work form, which is what is submitted to the BACB to say these are the hours and that's needed before you take your exam.
Yes, absolutely. And we
And
know there's,
that also needs to be kept
yes,
in case of audit or anything, but it's submitted. So
yes, that is the form that is submitted along with the application. And that also needs to be kept for 7 years. It must be accurate. All of the hours documented in that final form must be backed up by the monthly forms, by the session notes, by the hour logs, to make sure everything is in accordance with BACB requirements.
right, we didn't talk about that hours log. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that would be for the trainee to really keep track of the hours that they're doing, because not every hour is supervised. Some of the works that you need to do, restricted and unrestricted, are not. So you would have that in a separate log.
Yes,
Um,
and I think it's important in that hour log to differentiate what are restricted from unrestricted activities and what those would look like. I like having sort of an Excel form with a drop down menu of the acceptable unrestricted activities.
right, which you can go straight back to the handbook to get.
Exactly, exactly. Because I know these are the types of activities that I am going to approve as a supervisor. I am open to the trainee coming up with new ideas and discussing those and how those activities may or may not be appropriate for to be counted as unrestricted activities. But other than that, it should be clear to the trainee which of these unrestricted activities would be appropriate and approved by the BCBA supervisor ahead of time, unless, of course, things come up and we can discuss at that point in time. But yeah.
Right. And you might just want to log all hours, because there is a cap, like you can't get to a certain overage, but in case something's not counted, you could probably just put in one column the actual hours, and another column the hours that will be counted at that time based on the cap.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because there's a cap on the I believe it's 130 hours per month.
Per month. Yeah, I think so.
And so I always tell my trainees, you're welcome to do more hours. They just aren't going to be counted.
Right. But it's not
For
a
the
bad
month.
thing. I mean, like, as much experience as you
Exactly.
can get. And we always have to keep saying this, but a BCBA is not a terminal certification. It's like the very beginning of your journey. So the more that you can get prior to that, the better. And then, of course, you just keep growing and learning after that.
Absolutely. I feel like people get hung up in the 2000, and I say, you can do way more than 2000 hours. Please do more.
And have multiple supervisors don't just, if you are, let's say you are, think you're going to work in a school system, don't just do all of your hours in the school system. Like, do something over the summer, join a clinic, or do some in-home, because eventually you may not want to be there. And all of that work kind of informs you as a BCBA. So hopefully people don't have like very homogenous experiences. They have multiple supervisors, multiple locations. Make sure they go through the task lists and do all of those things to get that well-rounded. It's like up to you as a trainee to get that well-rounded experience.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, I agree.
So that kind of brings us to our talk about billing. So talk about, you get a lot of questions I hear about this. Is how does supervision fit in with billing and the documentation that's needed? So let's just back up a little bit and say, just because you were doing supervision, it may be billed to an insurance company. It may not be billed to an insurance company. You may be getting paid for those hours as a trainee, depending on how your work is set up. The supervisor is probably getting some compensation from you as is set up in the contract. But these aren't givens. They all have to be kind of managed and figured out. So how is it different when you can bill supervision, when you can bill for that?
It is different in the sense that it has a bit more weight to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Failing to bill accurately, for example, the implications of that may result in fraud allegations, audits, exactly, yes, investigations, reimbursement denials, which may end up hurting more than just one or two clients. It may end up hurting all the clients that are being serviced by that specific funder. Fines related to the fraud.
Recoupments,
Yeah, exactly. Recoupments, BACB ethical compliance issues. Obviously, you just mentioned 2.06, so we go right into that one. And ultimately, invalid supervision hours.
Exactly. That's in here as well.
That may be a big one, and that may sting quite a lot, especially if the actions, the actual exercise of supervision did occur, but it wasn't accurately recorded or billed.
So what do you suggest? Like, what are some good tips for
that? Billing accurately, obviously.
Just bill accurately.
Yeah. Looking at regulatory requirements, and for guidance on that, we have a fabulous ethics hotline consultant, Michelle Beal, who is an expert on, CPT codes and billing and so forth.
And I would say that ABA codes, I think it's abacodes.org is kind of the go-to place for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that.
And they'll answer your questions. I know you can, Jenna, but they will answer your questions if you ask them, which are great, but they have a lot of stuff on there as well.
Right. So the supervisor, I was going to say it behooves the BCBA supervisor, but I think it behooves everybody to be informed of the appropriate language in the code. Because language can be misinterpreted sometimes depending upon how the CPT code might be written. So
right, because the word supervision is not really there. It's direction of technician.
There you go.
Yeah, if you're not being directed with a client, then chances are and again, a funder would have a different viewpoint, but it may not be billable because the code does not say supervision, it says direct. And I know Medicaid especially will spell that out, but a lot of funders will spell out what can and cannot be billed. But that doesn't mean you're not expected to do those things. It just means that they're an in-kind service and they're not directly billable, but they're included in that rate. They're bundled in that rate. When they do those rate studies, they look at, there's going to need to be some supervision here. With respect to this client, when the client's not there, which is not directly billable, but we're going to increase the rate to match that. So
absolutely. And it's important to also document the client's progress toward the goals that were delineated, as well as the trainees' progress toward the goals that were delineated for them.
That's a really great point. Yeah.
Supervision involves both of them, and we do this with data, right? We provide data. This is where my client and trainee were during baseline. This is where they are at now as a result of supervision. And again, our data sort of speaks for itself.
Because you can't, and I'm like hearkening back to an article or something that Dr. Broadhead wrote, you can't be competent in something unless you have produced behavior change. You have exhibited that you've produced behavior change. So that's a really great documentation, especially if, like, let's say you want to specialize something in eating disorders or substance abuse or something, you can show that you produced behavior change, then you can prove that you are more competent, that's part of your scope of competence. So if it's not written down, how is it to know? So I love including that in that documentation. You're so smart.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I have learned the good way and the hard way. Let's just say.
It's experience. Oh, goodness.
It takes a lot of learning.
No, so I'm really so glad that we included that billing point in there. I think that was important. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that we had said we were going to talk about? What else should we
No,
bring up?
I think with regard to billing and reimbursement and paying the trainee, it's important to determine from the beginning of the supervisory relationship which activities will and will not be billed, and therefore will or will not be paid to the trainee. Because many companies don't really get paid for unrestricted activities, the development of the behavior plan, the graphing, the writing up of the assessment, things, or maybe the assessment, part of it is billed, but there are plenty of other unrestricted activities that BCBAs engage in, and so do trainees, by the nature of being in the supervisory relationship, that aren't really billed.
Right.
And
That doesn't mean they're not necessarily paid. Like your organization may determine that they're going to pay for them. It's just that they can't bill them directly to a payer.
And many organizations may not be in a place to be able to do that.
Exactly.
And so again, right. And so that's something that should be determined from the beginning of the supervisory relationship, so that the trainee can decide whether this would be a match for them.
Right. And also, I mean, just because if a company isn't able to pay for that, it may actually be a good sign that they are perhaps a little more ethical in how they treat their in that they aren't overbilling or they aren't overburdening their BCBAs, because they're just not collecting all of those funds, but they're letting you, maybe the trade-off there, okay, I'm not paid for this specifically, but I might have a lighter caseload because my company recognizes that that's healthier for my client and for my staff.
Absolutely.
So those are kind of things that you have to weigh. I don't think we can always think of money being the ultimate reinforcer. There are other things that hopefully will reinforce that behavior of doing the things that you need to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What else? Are we missing anything? This is documentation 101. What else would you want to say to our listeners about documentation?
I think we've been very, very comprehensive, or pretty comprehensive in our coverage here.
We're about we need to be. So.
Oh, this is true. Oh wow, yeah, this is true. I think we might be a little bit over time, but this is good. I think a lot of what we've said might be transcribed in the form of some sort of list or checklist for people.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that they can take some of our descriptions and put them into some type of documentation for them as well.
Or like you have to have a supervision notebook, and exactly.
Yes.
All of the stuff that you want. That's great. And now Motivity is going to host you as a webinar. I don't have that date off the top of my head, but I'm sure Mark can kind of add it in. Unless you have it off the top of your head, you can share it.
Somewhere in January. We don't have a yes.
Yes, January 2025, depending on when you're watching this. If it's after that, check out Behavior Life, because it will be recorded and then But I'm so excited that we get to host you and get a little more information from you.
Thank you. I'm excited too, and it'll be all about individualized supervision plans. And so I'm excited to bring that topic up and share a little bit of what we've put together.
Awesome. Thank you. It was wonderful hosting you today, and I hope everybody enjoyed it and got something out of it. All right. Thank you very much.